A show for the summer of 2025 that I was certainly looking forward to in the romance category specifically was The Fragrant Flower Blooms with Dignity. It is the first season of a highly rated series focused on the relationship of Rentaro Sumagi from the Chidori Public High School and Karuko Wagari from the all-girls Kikyo Private Academy, which just so happens to be next door. They seem to be worlds apart because despite the schools being adjacent to one another, they are essentially two different types of students that attend both. Chidori Public High School hosts a deep-rooted culture of delinquency in their student body, while Kikyo Private Academy is a school not only just for girls, but for those of wealthy backgrounds more specifically. We see Rentaro being propped up as this menacing entity that strikes fear into the hearts of those that aren't his immediate friends, but he doesn't care because he's content with his personal life. What he doesn't share with his friends, however, is that he also works at his parents' cake shop. Fate shines a golden light upon him one day at work when a girl at the cake shop sees him and runs off before he can speak to her. After meeting again and apologizing for running off, the girl explains that she didn't run off because of the way he looked, and she instead actually thinks that he's a pretty kind-hearted person. This girl is Karuko, and her personality is so bright and contagious that it catches Rentaro off guard. Nevertheless, he aims to be friends with her, but things take a shaky turn when he comes to find out that she is a Kikyo student. Simply being from a different school isn't the issue, but instead it is the disdain that the private school girls have for the alleged delinquents of Chidori that poses the main dilemma. If you're new to the channel, welcome to Sensei Cole's Syndicate. And if you're a repeated appearance maker, then welcome back. I hope today has treated you well, and even if it hasn't, I hope this video makes your day a little bit better. I will be breaking down the show in episode order and attempting not to nitpick too much for the sake of time in the process. If you enjoy this piece that I have created, please do me the honor of liking the video, subscribing to join the syndicate, and chatting with me in the comments. And without further ado, I give you The Fragrant Flower Blooms with Dignity. We start out with the short scene of Rentaro sitting in his classroom looking out of the window at the nearby building to Kikyo Private Academy and pondering about how he will never have anything to do with what goes on behind their building walls. We then see this group of delinquents bugging another group of students because they wanted to harass them and inquire about Rentaro because of a previous run-in that he had with a friend of theirs. Before any of Rentaro's classmates can respond, they're literally gagged at the mere sight of him behind the two students that were hunting for him. While standing at a distractingly higher height, wielding a menacing gaze, and showing no sense of fear in his posture, he asked what was going on. When the two that were looking for him turned to meet his gaze, they literally scrambled away to avoid potential confrontation. Related to small dogs acting tough and barking at other small dogs just to turn around after shadows cast over them, and it's a literal Doberman breathing down their necks. Rentaro is revealed to not have even been attempting to scare them, but instead genuinely wanted to know what was going on. He pokes fun at his friends and they swear up and down that the other two were the aggressors and they were just minding their own business. While walking to school, Rentaro shares a story from the previous night about a couple their age arguing about cheating outside. While being invested in the drama that he could hear, he elected to go outside and take a closer look, like he was part of the Scooby-Doo gang looking for clues. And honestly, I would be no different. The girl smacked the guy and ran off, but Rentaro walked over to check on him and instead scared the poor kid half to death before he ran off and fell in the process. We then see the first instance of outright discrimination from the girls from the private school right after he finishes telling his story, and his friends get a laugh out of it. I wasn't expecting the hate and distaste to be so outright and abrasive, and perhaps more of a fear because they would think the delinquents of the public school were dirty, aggressive, and fiendish, but the interaction was anything but. The group of boys stopped speaking first when they saw that they would cross paths with the girls, and the girls went from giggling and chatting to having stone cold faces while looking at the cold sidewalk in front of them. After passing, one of Rentaro's friends, Usami, picks up a handkerchief that one of the two girls had dropped. He calls out politely to let her know, and instead of turning back and being polite and a normal person, their faces were pure anger and disgust as the owner told him, "Just burn it." Usami is understandably confused, and then she doubles down saying that I've lost all my desire to use it. And honestly, this felt like one of those times you tell your friend to go talk to the one girl he has a crush on and help him work up the courage to talk to her, and you encourage him by saying the worst thing she can say is no. In this situation, that was my literal internal dialogue until she started off by saying burn it. I knew whatever came next would have been twice as sickening to hear. Both girls turn and walk off, leaving the boys to stand and ponder how much the girls actually hate them. Usami jokes that they were just flustered by his good looks, but we know it was anything but that. Nevertheless, it was a pretty positive coping mechanism if I do say so myself, as they enter the school's gates, and we see a wide shot that shows the true difference between the elites and the delinquents. The boys look like they're walking into an older apartment complex building, while the girls' gate and building look like a government building in the UK back before minimalism became the thing of construction. We see Rentaro break down the difference between the schools and explaining, more importantly, that all of the dummies and the delinquents get into the public school, which leads to all the girls of the private school openly showing hatred towards them as a result. We see him get a text from his mother to come help at the pastry shop after school, and we see him simply tell one of his friends that he can't go do karaoke after school with them while avoiding sharing the exact reason why. We see him get home late and he explains that it was a long walk from school to his mom before questioning why she would even make him run the counter when he's known to scare people. But she just assures him that there's only one customer in the store, so there's nothing to worry about because it's raining outside anyways. When he makes his way to the front of the store, he sees the umbrella in the holding area and proceeds to look around for the owner, who would inevitably be the lone customer at the shop because of the rain. However, she ended up catching his eye a little longer than expected, and as she ate the last of her cake, she saw him staring at her without any words. This led to her choking and him grabbing her a glass of water to help wash that cake down. Afterwards, he just stares at the countless empty plates and then at her while thinking about how crazy someone so small would have to be to down so much cake in one sitting. As he ponders further, he wonders if she's in middle school, but from her point of view, it must have been so embarrassing to almost choke yourself out on cake and then being stared at by this tall mass of a high school boy. After meeting his gaze, she jumped up, grabbed her purse, and thanked him for the food, and then rushed out of the store and right into the rain. She left so fast he didn't even get to say thank you, and this led to him believing that he was the reason she scurried out, and most likely because his presence genuinely scared her. Honestly, it was a worthy assumption to make, but it broke my heart seeing her run off in the rain and him standing alone in the store, forced to watch her scamper off into the distance. He later talks to his mom about her and she tells him that she's Miss Waggery and that she won't stop coming to the shop just because he might have scared her on one occasion. She then says that he needs to learn to stop blaming himself so much because it's a bad habit, and I appreciate her sharing those words. Thus far, he seems like a gentle giant archetype that happens to appear menacing despite having a heart of gold, and honestly, it can come off as more of a curse than a gift at times. It gets a little bit sweeter when we see him pondering about her at school and wondering how he could meet her again, because going to every middle school nearby would not be honestly feasible. After he snaps out of his funk to go grab his lunch, his friend Usumi asks the rest of the group if they see how he keeps everybody a little bit away from himself or if he just imagines it, and I think that was a surprisingly observant thought to share for somebody that is presented as just another delinquent boy in the beginning. While reading at home, Rentaro's mom runs down the hall and practically breaks down his door before telling him the news that not only was Waggery at the store, but she specifically requested to speak to Rentaro. He comes downstairs and we see her turn around with rosy cheeks in the cutest of outfits, which slightly stuns Rentaro before he greets her. Just before he can actually initiate a conversation about the previous day, she says that she wants to treat him, and he understandably is completely lost. He still thinks she's a middle schooler, so in the next scene when we see them sitting at a table in the shop with tea and cake, he has no idea how to take the situation at hand. She apologizes for running off and offers the cake as an apology. He tells her that he can't accept it, but he sees her all cute and fawning over the cake from across the table, so he elects to pass it over to her instead. She tries to reject, but he politely doubles down, and she was eyeballing that cake like she just got done with a shoot for a Survivor television show. Granted, the cake looked phenomenal, so I might have to give her a pass on that alone. After exchanging nervous glances up to him and down to the cake and pondering for a moment, she decides to take him up on his offer and begins to chow down. He thinks to himself about how much she likes cake, and then right after she finishes eating, she calls attention to the fact that it must be unusual for him to see how much she can eat by herself. He reluctantly agrees, and she admits that since she was the only customer at the store that night, she didn't want to wait until she got home to fill her belly. She asks to exchange names by offering hers first, and then continues to repeat his while fiddling with her teacup. Rentaro can't figure out why she has any remote interest in him because she says, "Now I finally know." She almost gives us a cuteness overload while attempting to explain herself and narrowly manages to say that she had seen him around before because he helps out from time to time. He ponders for a moment and realizes that she actually didn't run off because he scared her, and when he asks her about it, she clears up the misunderstanding by saying that she simply never had a guy stare at her like that before, and it made her a little flustered. He He understandably can't fathom this because it is common for most people to be scared of him when he stares at them because it's just always been that way. So this is certainly a first. He looks up from his coffee and there's a moment of interesting tension when his eyes meet her gaze. For the first time, the Rentaro that I found to be surprisingly relatable became even more human than he had been in the entire episode, simply because he blushed. He simply can't comprehend it and abruptly rises to suggest walking her to the station because it's getting dark outside. She buys some cake before heading out and tells him that she can make the trip on her own without issue, so they bid each other farewell on the patio area of the storefront instead. Before walking off though, Wagari can't help but share one more tidbit of information, specifically referencing when he asked if she was scared of him yesterday. She tells him that not only was she not scared of him, but she has never once thought of him as scary at all. She then smiles and asks him to believe her before going about her merry way. But on the side street, we see two unfavorable citizens smirking in the background, and something tells me they don't walk the streets at night to make sure ladies get home safely, if you catch my drift. Rentaro runs upstairs while his mom cleans up the shop with the other workers, and then he sinks on the floor of his bedroom before thinking back on the words that people said about him growing up. He recognizes that all he ever heard were put-downs, and as we see him lift his face from his arms, his cheeks were burning red from tears. Before he can keep thinking though, his mom almost breaks the door down and asks him if the cake that she saw outside was Wagari's. We get a scene switch and honestly it's worse than I thought, because those two buffoons from earlier didn't even wait for her to get closer to the station before dragging her off into an alley. We see one grabbing her wrist and verbally harassing her as she asked him to let go. He tells her not to be like that and let's have fun. This honestly had my blood boiling, just watching this part play out on my screen as I clenched my hands together, praying for Rentaro to get there in time to stop them and lay down the law like a real man should in the process. We see him panting and running down the street searching for her, but then he overhears one of them say his name. He recognizes that it was the two guys from earlier that were bothering his friends and waits near a bush to hear more of the conversation. The apparent leader of the duo was grabbing her arm and starts spewing nonsense about Rentaro's past and how he was allegedly a menace and a troublemaker even in middle school, and that's why he goes to the school full of delinquent problem children. Rentaro starts to piece things together and it seemed like Wagari was genuinely entertaining the words that were being said, as the first words we hear her say is, "How scary." The goon tries to spin it and says she should hang out with them instead, but being the sweetheart that she is, I knew Wagari would come through for Rentaro, and that's exactly what she did. All she asked was, how can you judge someone based on gossip? Which is a valid question. And we see in Rentaro's face that it changed his entire perspective in the moment. For the first time, he heard somebody challenge the foul stories that were spread about him, instead of saying, it looks like this shoe would fit, and forcing him to wear it. Dare I say, for the first time, somebody believed in him. She continued asking them if they had ever attempted to actually speak to Rentaro, and if they hadn't, why not give it a chance? But unfortunately, both me and you know these two bozos don't care for sensical thinking or logic in the slightest, or else we wouldn't be here. The main one openly says that he frankly couldn't care less if he's nice or not, and then even after hearing that from his mouth while he still had hold of her arm, she still begged him to stop bad-mouthing him behind his back. She does this while avoiding eye contact and staring straight down at the floor, and remembering that Rentaro thought she was in middle school when he first saw her frame, one could only imagine the sheer fear she felt in the situation with seemingly no way out. But despite it all, she steadies herself and meets their gaze to tell them in the simplest way that doing such a thing is unpleasant. We see their expressions change, and then the main antagonist bum drops her wrist, and I actually thought he was gonna heed her words, or at least leave her alone for that moment. But I gave him too much credit because both he and his crony are both truly spawns of the scummiest organisms on earth. Why do I feel so strongly, you may ask? Well, it's really simple. This piece of human filth, this piece of human excrement, this villainous, toxic behemoth of a high school boy went from thinking he could use her to summon Rentaro to instead deciding to put paws on her while cocking back and swinging a closed fist with full intent on making contact. In the big 2025, we're out here beating women half our body weight, dude? She's so cute and small, I think a mellow gust of wind might blow her airborne. What the hell actually went through this dude's head? I genuinely want to know. But anyways, you know Rentaro wasn't just gonna sit there and watch that happen, so he rushes in. But instead of cleaning that feverish, ooh, I almost said a no-no word, I'm sorry guys. Instead of sending that clown and his partner blasting off like Team Rocket, he jumps in front of the punch to shield Wagari, but cuts his forehead open in the process. Then, the clown and his follow-up act friend realize it was Rentaro, and he gives the coldest 2 lines I've heard in a minute. "You wanted me, right? How did that work out?" And he had them immediately apologizing and putting on the afterburners to get up out of there. The next moment, we see the itsy bitsy Wagari cry out to Rentaro about him bleeding as she pulled him down to her level so she could use her handkerchief to wipe him off. She even apologizes, and it broke my heart when she did, but Rentaro corrects her and assures her that it was not her fault because he was only bleeding because he hit his head on the shutter of the building. He then explains that he would have stopped the punch instead if he realized that bleeding would upset her. In that moment, she was taken aback because what sane person would allow themselves to get hit when they could literally stop the hit? But he opens up and honestly says that he rationalized it as accepting it as punishment. He apologized for dragging her into the mess and even bowed to show greater sincerity. She tells him that it wasn't his fault, but he tells her that it was. And after a flashback, he feels shame for allowing such a nice and genuine person to experience such an unsavory circumstance. He doubles down as he mentally beats himself up and apologizes one more time before she opens up her own heart to meet him in ways he's never been approached before. She explained that she doesn't understand why he's supposed to be so scary and keeps wiping his forehead before remembering that there's something else that she didn't properly say yet. So she backed up and then with a smile said, "Thank you for saving me." And this moment just did something to me, man. We see him curse before going into his memories and admitting to himself that he never thought he would ever see the day where anyone would acknowledge him. But in this moment, because of one small girl, he actually came to desire it. He then walks her to the train station to ensure her safety, and just as they part ways, she calls out to him and tells him that she will meet him at the shop again and they can have cake again. And once again, the boy was left to feel wanted. There was also a bit of subtle foreshadowing when she got off her cell phone and remembered his strong embrace as he enveloped her to protect her from the punch, but it's too early to say where that would get tied back in, but keep an eye out. We see Rentaro at school the next day thinking about how he couldn't sleep and pondering on when she'll stop by the shop again as he looks out the window at the girls' private school. And then he sees something unusual from one windowsill. He sees a curtain moving around, and just as he ponders if someone was going to open it, the curtain parts, and there she is, Wagari, in all of her patient beauty. He panics once he makes the realization and yanks the curtain on his side forward so he can hide from her gaze. Then he realizes not only is she his age, but she's also a student at Kikyo Private Academy. Back at school, Saku, Ayato, and Rentaro are all listening to Usumi explain how the Kikyo private school girls glare at him and treat him like dog water basically. They pay attention to the fact that the curtain is drawn past Rentaro's desk, which is unusual, but they say looking at the Kikyo building all day would irritate anybody, and he adamantly jumps up using his big boy voice to explain that it had nothing to do with that. He comes up with a foolproof excuse of it being too bright, but nobody was really buying it. Later on, he rags on himself for drawing the curtain on Wagari and even guessed that she would never come back to the shop after that level of rudeness. But since you're watching my review, you knew that was cap. So as soon as school lets out, Rentaro agrees to join Usumi and the gang for karaoke, but after leaving the school building, plans quickly change. You have the ever so lovely Princess Wagari waiting outside of the school walls for Rentaro, while 30 plus guys sit by the main gate, just staring her down, confused by her presence. Usumi has been pissed about Kikyo girls glaring at him and immediately starts pressing the petite princess. We see Rentaro, who was originally freaking out, get on timing and step up to grab him by his collar to stop him from yelling at her. At first he seemed pissed, and then she apologized and said she was waiting for somebody, but in reality that just meant he threw a tantrum because he wanted a pretty girl to wait for him by the gates, which honestly is the realest thing to wish for if we're gonna be real. Next thing you know, Kikyo lackeys pull up and drag Wagari away because they think the boys are icky, which messes up what could have been a potentially crazy reveal. While walking with the boys, Rentaro reflects on the situation and wonders if she actually could have been waiting for him, which makes him happy even though he couldn't understand why consciously. His friends think he's making a new expression that low-key makes him scarier than usual, but they let it slide and trudge on to the karaoke booths. Saku has been peeping game all day, however, and after catching Rentaro being absent-minded and picking a song, he calls him out and all the other boys join in, admitting that they've seen him act differently lately. He contemplates telling them but thinks they may come to hate on Wagari instead of sympathizing with his newfound feelings, which leads him to brush them off. He gets home and peeps that the shop lights are still on and the door was unlocked, but right after coming in, he finds out why that was. Wagari was waiting the whole time just to apologize about earlier, even though she realistically did nothing wrong. She admits that she underestimated how bad the tensions were between their two schools, but Rentaro obviously quickly forgives her. His mom brings in leftover cake and we see them all share a laugh at her expense when she turns down the offer, just for her little old stomach to start growling right afterwards. Rentaro then invites her to share in eating the cake with her, which led to an interesting conversation as well. She clears the air and says that she was outside the gate waiting on him, but also promised not to do it again because of how reckless it was. We then get the cutest sequence where he tells her not to apologize and overshares, saying that she made him feel glad, but then he tries to backtrack because it sounded weird. But then she told him, please don't take that back. And then they both got flustered. He then expresses that he didn't expect her to come to the shop, not because it wasn't planned, but instead because she goes to Kikyo and found out that he goes to Chidori, even going as far as to say being involved with him couldn't aid her at all. But she quickly erases this possibility by saying she was happy to come when she found out he went to the school right beside hers. She quickly rushes to leave after that, and he realizes that once again, he unfortunately brought her sadness. Rentaro's mom pops in next, and after seeing her son was worse for wear, she made him explain the situation. She calls him out and explains that through his density, she wants to genuinely know him despite the school that he attends, and instead of meeting her in the middle, he was just treating her like how people treated him, just judging a book by its cover while not actually knowing anything about her. When he realized this, he punched himself square in the jaw, leaving him tasting his own blood with a bruise on his cheek. He thanks his mom for her words and then sets out the next day to handle business. He left early to catch her before she entered her school and apologized for thinking he was the reason she made a sad face before leaving. But the whole time, she didn't even realize that she did at all and got instantly embarrassed. She thought she hid it well, but also apologized for putting him in the position to feel that way as well. He steeled his resolve after she asked him how he could be so nice and decided to open up to her just as she opened up to him. They finally managed a fresh start, and with a smile on her face, Wagari told him that their schools don't matter and she only cared to know more about him as a person. And thus their friendship was renewed with greater strength. After heading to the teacher's office in hopes of turning on the AC because of the blistering heat in the classroom, Usami and Rentaro have their sports festival dreams damaged when their teacher tells them that they won't be able to participate. It wasn't because of something they had already done, but instead because he believed that they would inevitably fail their midterms and have to retake them during the festival. But after an ice cream award, Usami felt up to par and motivated to pass it with flying colors. We see Saku not wanting to carry Usami and his poor studying habits despite the possibility of all the boys being in a study group together. This leads to Usami pairing up with only Rentaro and going to the library to achieve their goals of passing the midterms. But during the school day, Rentaro wrestled with the idea of inviting Wagari to the cake shop since his mom asked him to because she hasn't been by recently. At the end of the school day, she declined because she was busy, and this created a sense of disappointment for Rentaro that was obviously washed away by Usami's antics. They went to the public library to avoid the school heat, but failed ultimately to gain ground, which led to Rentaro suggesting that they should just ask Saku for assistance instead of thugging it out alone like Usami planned. After Usami heeds his warnings and goes to make amends, Rentaro ends up surrendering his table to some middle school girls that couldn't find one and walked through the library before overhearing Wagari and a classmate studying together. He was able to appreciate how great of a student she was and even her drawing abilities, while recognizing the disparity between himself and her all the more apparently. While resting on a bench outside, she popped in overhead saying that she saw him earlier and decided to take a break just to check on him. We find out that the whole time Rentaro assumed that she was rich because she went to Kikyo, but she was actually a scholarship girl and could only attend by staying near the top of the grade leaderboards. She currently even sits at the #1 spot in her class. After hearing about her regular run-of-the-mill upbringing, he recognizes how greatly he previously judged her just by attending a different school than his own, and this led to him honestly asking her to help him study when she had time, even though he knew she already didn't have a lot of extra time as it was. But do you know what she said anyways? Yes. Then turmoil arrived. in the form of a silver-haired girl named Subaru. Just as Wagari prepared to rejoin her friends, she arrived on the scene ready to defend her honor like no other, shooting daggers from her eyes at Rentaro. She ignored the pleading of Wagari regarding the situation, and as Rentaro's friends arrived and Usumi bent down while trying to remember Wagari, we see Rentaro instinctively back him up while Subaru pulled Wagari away. Rentaro then lies to play damage control to Subaru, and Usumi apologizes for making a scene before, which leads to Wagari apologizing and confusing Subaru. But even after leaving the boys, it was clear that Rentaro left a lasting impression on Subaru, who we find out hates all boys and thinks they're bad people, but especially Chidori High boys. Later on, while Rentaro is struggling with the problems from earlier, he gets a fateful call from Wagari, who apologizes for her friend earlier, and Rentaro feeling the need to lie in order to protect her. Then she schedules their study session for Saturday, but does it in a way that sounded too polite to Rentaro, which led him to feel like she had placed distance between them that wasn't there before. He longed for her accidentally casual tone with him because it genuinely made him feel close to her. So, while imagining what she looked like on the other end of the phone, he told her that she could drop the politeness and be casual when talking to him. It was clunky and awkward, but it got the job done. The boy has her hoping he couldn't hear her grinning on the other end of that phone after what he said.